I was using Craigslist as a means of selling some of my old, unused things I had stashed away in my house. I had plans to move out in the next few months, so I was just trying to organize what I needed from what I didn't need, and that's when I found my old motor tools. They were high quality and still functional, but I had gotten battery-powered ones to replace them not long ago. With no use for them anymore, I took a couple pictures and posted them up on Craigslist. I had listed a power drill, driver, and matching tool set for $80. Considering they weren't that old and still fully functional, this was a really good deal. It didn't take long to get responses. In just an hour, I got 2 replies to my post. One of them emailed me asking if $50 would be okay, but I politely declined. The other reply stated that they were very interested and wanted to buy them that same night for the listed price. I agreed and said I was available at 5 if he wanted to swing by and pick them up. I never let anyone into my house when selling things. I'd always just bring the stuff out to my driveway and talk to them there. It was a well-trafficked neighborhood street, so I wasn't worried about anyone attempting something out in the open. As I usually did, I was going to stand out in the driveway with the items a bit before 5 and wait for them so that I could make the transaction as quick as possible. But just past 4:30, there was a knock at the door. I looked out, seeing a man standing there with his red car parked in the driveway. I opened the door a crack, asking who he was. The man said he was here to buy the tools that were on Craigslist and admitted to being early. I told him to hold on for a minute and to just wait in his car, as I wasn't expecting him yet. He hesitated, making the interaction more awkward than it should have been, but then he turned around. Once he walked away, I got all the tools together and met him at the top of the driveway. I had an outlet outside for him to test the tools with, and he seemed satisfied with them. "About 20, he said while holding the drill. "The deal was 80. I can do a little lower, but 20 is too low," I said nicely, though I was slightly annoyed because he had already agreed to pay $80 for them, and $20 was just a total ripoff. He put the drill down, and without even looking at me, he walked back to his car and drove away. I was confused and upset, feeling like I'd been played and just had wasted my time. I got the tools back inside and just went on with my night, trying not to let myself get too upset about it. Really, it was just a small inconvenience. At least, that's what I thought. A couple hours later, I walked by the front windows, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw that same red car. It was parked just down the road, 3 houses away from mine. I looked closely, trying to be sure that it was that same man, but nobody was inside it. It was an empty parked car, so I had no way of knowing for sure. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence and carried on. Another hour would go by. I was just going on with my night, making food and watching TV, but then someone knocked on my door. I was a little shaken, but chose to ignore it and hope that whoever it was would go away. Obviously, the man from earlier was my first thought. Only 30 seconds passed before they knocked again. "Hey, it's me. I decided I'll take the tools. I brought the money," he yelled from the other side of the door. I didn't believe him at all. It all came together in my mind that that car that I'd seen an hour ago was his, meaning that he'd been stalking my house all night. I didn't respond and instead called the police, informing them of the man's name and the car he had. The man called out several more times, saying he wanted to buy the tools, but then it went silent for a minute. Another minute passed. I wasn't sure what to do. The police were already on their way and would be here any minute, so I felt safe enough to be able to check out the windows. I quietly walked over to the window that was beside the door. But then suddenly, I heard something hit the side of the house with great force. The sound was followed by leaves rustling and footsteps running away. I looked out the window and saw the guy running with a limp down to his car. The police turned in at the perfect time though, stopping him halfway. It surprised me to hear that the man admitted to a lot. He said he planned on robbing me, but I wouldn't let him into the house, which complicated things for him. Additionally, he tried climbing the tree on the side of my house and jumping onto the roof, but he missed, hitting the side and falling on his leg. The thing is though, he was armed with a knife, and the roof he tried to jump on was just under my second-story window, which after checking, was unlocked. So, if he had made the jump, he actually would have gotten inside. He claimed it was just an attempted robbery, but claims are just that. I stopped using Craigslist, and even to this day, I lock every single window in my house, even the ones that I think are unreachable. I used Craigslist many years ago to find a room for rent. I was looking for a house to stay at and be able to split rent with a roommate or roommates. It took maybe a week to find a place that was suitable for me and several phone calls with the owner before I was ready to move in. The owner who was to be my roommate seemed like a really normal, nice guy who was similar in age as me. He told me all about the place and what to expect, and I also felt like we connected well. With everything seeming perfect, I was getting really excited. I didn't have much to move, so I packed it all up and stuffed it in the trunk of my car, and in just a few days, I drove out 30 minutes to my soon-to-be home. It was located outside of the main town and in more of a woodsy terrain. It had a long driveway leading far from the road. Pulling in though, it was not as I'd expected. It was a very old, wooden home. I knew it was passed down from his parents, but this place looked to be at least 100 years old. The pictures of the inside that I'd seen on Craigslist looked to be fairly modern, so I assumed they had to have done some pretty big renovations. I left everything in my car as I went up to the door and knocked. Aaron, the owner, came and showed me around. While the outside was not so impressive, the inside was the opposite. Very well maintained, clean, and definitely had been renovated not long ago. I was really happy with everything and moved my things in that night. Several days went by with no issues. It didn't even feel like I'd found this place on Craigslist. It felt like I was just living with a friend. Aaron worked in town though, so he was gone most of the time, and I worked from home, so I got to have the whole house to myself. Well, not the whole house. There was one door that was always locked. It wasn't any of my business, and I knew that, so I never brought it up with Aaron. But it still got me wondering. It was almost definitely the basement door, but this was odd because he said the house was a one-story home, not mentioning anything about having a basement. Another couple days went by before something happened. Aaron brought home some fast food for dinner, and then went to bed early because he had work the next day. I stayed up a while longer, then did the same. Laying in bed though, I had trouble falling asleep. There wasn't any reason for this, it was just one of those nights. But after a while, I heard Aaron's bedroom door open. I was listening because there was nothing else to do, but no sounds came. I waited a whole 2 or 3 minutes before he started walking, slowly down the hall towards my door. Just as he was passing though, he stopped. I heard the floorboards creak, followed by the door thump softly, as if he was pressing up against it. He stayed there behind the door for a while. I don't even know how long, but then he walked away. Not back toward his room, but the other way, toward the main hallway. Then a door opened and closed. I didn't know what to think. It was really weird and creepy, but also I'd known Aaron for a while now and didn't see him as a weird person. But what was he doing? And where did he go? I stayed awake as long as I could, waiting to hear him come back, but he never did. Over the next few nights, I noticed a pattern. Every time I would go to bed, about 30 minutes later, Aaron would open his door, stand still for a minute, then walk to my door, stand still again, then leave and go into the locked door. He never slept in his room. He always slept somewhere behind the weird locked door. What made it so creepy was that he was trying so hard to keep a secret from me. I decided one night that I was going to figure this all out, because I was beginning to feel unsafe. I went to bed and waited for Aaron to do his usual routine. He opened his bedroom door and walked over to mine. Then, as soon as I heard him unlock and open the other door, I got up and quickly went into the hallway, catching him standing by the open door. He looked back at me, clearly startled. "Hey, is everything okay, Aaron?" I asked. He just stared at me, eyes still open wide from the scare I gave him. "Why do you keep going to that door every night?" I broke the silence, getting impatient. We were standing on opposite sides of the long, dark hallway, but I could sense that something was wrong with him. We stared at each other still, and I took a step closer. "Aaron?" As soon as I spoke his name, he ran around the corner and straight to the back door, opening it and continuing to run for the trees. I looked out the back door, seeing him disappear into the dark woods. I was shaking, horrified at what just happened. I have no words to describe the unknown thoughts running through my head. I closed the back door, then grabbed a knife from the kitchen and walked over to the door Aaron had opened. It was in fact a basement, but there was no light switch and it clearly had not been renovated like the rest of the house. The walls were old, decaying wood. I debated whether or not to go down. I was so intrigued and curious, but terrified as well. The longer I stood there, the more afraid I became. I turned and ran back to my room, packed everything I could and stuffed them in my car, and drove away, never looking back. I never talked to Aaron again, and he never tried to contact me either. I didn't know what was going on with him, or what he was doing in that house, but I didn't want to be involved. After a while, I forgot about it, but almost 5 years later, I found myself wondering about it again. I looked up the house online and found some strange things. It had been torn down years ago. There was an article from 5 years ago, just a few months after I left, stating that the house was abandoned. To me, this meant that when Aaron ran away that night, he never came back. I kept reading, and it stated that the house was torn down due to what they described as criminal findings. It didn't go into any more detail about what those criminal findings were. This really had me shaken up for a few weeks. Things like this probably wouldn't happen nowadays, but you can never be too careful. I'm a 25-year-old male, and this happened to me 3 years ago. I had just signed a lease for a small house in the town I lived in. Having been living in an apartment for a few years, I didn't have a lot of furniture or large house decorations to fill the space in my rental. While I had a decent-sized couch and TV stand, I only had a mini TV that I wanted to put up in my bedroom since it was so small. Not having a ton of money to work with though, I took to Craigslist to find a larger TV for the living room. I found a few nice flat-screen TVs listed on the site. They were all over my budget though, and honestly, a lot nicer than I actually needed. I just wanted a large TV to fill the space in my living room, I didn't actually care about the quality of the picture on the TV. Anyway, I finally found one that seemed to work with what I needed. It was cheap, large, and was said to be in working condition. It was an old flat-screen TV from probably 10 years ago. Compared to today, they aren't even considered flat screens anymore, as they're usually 3 to 4 inches thick and really heavy. I sent the owner an email and continued with my search. Finding nothing else worth looking into, I just hoped for the best with that one TV. It wasn't until the following morning that I received a response to my email. The owner introduced himself as Mitch and said he'd love to show me the TV whenever I was available. I don't know if I just read it in a weird way or what, but he seemed to be over the top excited about this. It made me a little uncomfortable, but I just figured it was a happy old man or something. I said I could do any day this week after I got off work at 6, and Mitch said tomorrow at 6:30 would be perfect for him, leaving his address at the bottom of the email, along with a Google Calendar invite to an event labeled as Craigslist TV. I accepted it, though I wasn't really sure what the purpose of it was, and it was definitely not a normal thing people do, but it didn't affect me in any way. I got my truck emptied out, and the next day I went to work, then went straight to his address afterwards. It was dark out by now, and when I pulled into his driveway, I saw all the lights were on inside. I checked one last time to make sure I had all the cash on hand, then got out of my truck and went to the front door. Walking up, I could see that the front door was partially open. There was no screen door or anything, just one main door. Thinking it was left open for me, I leaned over and peeked inside, but didn't see anyone, so I rang the doorbell. Right when the bell rang, I heard something drop on the far end of the house. Then it went quiet. There was something about that noise that made me start getting nervous. After a moment, I decided I had a bad feeling about this and was just going to leave. But then footsteps came from behind the door, which then opened slightly wider, revealing a man. "Need something?" he said, half his body still behind the door. Yeah, I was here to look at your TV. We scheduled for 6:30 today." The man looked at me for a second. "All right." He opened the door completely and let me inside. I will say, at that moment, I knew something was wrong. He wasn't acting at all like he was in the emails. I expected a happy old man, not a large, grumpy, middle-aged dude, but I was already inside by the time all the alarms were going off in my head. The TV was in the room right next to the door, so he stood there while I looked at it. Yeah, this looks good. I'll take it," I said, not even knowing if it worked or not, but I wanted to get this over with quickly. I held out the money. He looked at it for a moment, then back at me. He reached out and took it, then shoved it in his pocket, and without giving me any time to react, he grabbed me by the shoulder and shoved me back towards the door, yelling at me to leave. I didn't argue. I sprinted out to my truck and drove away. Not long after, I pulled to the side and called the police to let them know I'd been robbed. The whole time, I was just thinking about how stupid they were, meeting me at their own house, robbing me, and letting me go, knowing that I knew where they lived. But when the police got to the house and called me back, I was in complete shock hearing what they told me. Over that week, though, things became more clear. The man I met at the house was not Mitch. Mitch, the owner of the house, was found unconscious in the kitchen. Thankfully, he survived, though he had some pretty bad injuries. The man I met at the door was another customer Mitch was meeting from Craigslist to pick up some kitchenware he was also selling. He ended up beating and robbing Mitch, likely just minutes before I showed up. What's even crazier is that Mitch had sent that man a Google Calendar invite as well, and the man accepted it, probably unknowing that I showed his email, which just so happened to be his first and last name. He was caught within a few days. During this whole case, I got to actually meet Mitch, and he was indeed a happy old man, even despite what happened to him. Being a relatively young and shy person, I've started using dating apps to help me meet more people and hopefully find a lasting relationship. I struggle with putting myself out there, especially in public with people I've never met, so apps like Tinder are great for me to get comfortable talking with someone before actually meeting them in person. For reference, I'm a female in my early 20s and I've been using Tinder for a little over a year at the time. Most of my interactions up until this point had been fine, usually either ending up dating for a couple months or just becoming friends. All of the breakups had been mutual and had no hard feelings. Anyway, this began a couple months after my last relationship. I was talking to a guy who I'll refer to as Peter for about 2 weeks on Tinder. From our back and forth texting, he seemed like a nice, somewhat shy person, but part of me liked that because I was shy as well. Eventually, he finally asked me out on a date, and we met up at a local restaurant later that week. Upon meeting him in person, nothing seemed off at first. One of my biggest fears is that they'll look nothing like they did in the pictures, but Peter didn't look any different, and he was just as soft-spoken as he was over text. Our conversation at dinner that night was really awkward though. He barely spoke and kept looking around. Me, not being a big talker either, was trying really hard to get him to open up a bit, but he would give simple one-word answers. At one point, he even left the table saying he forgot something in his car and didn't come back for almost 15 minutes, leaving me there alone. So, of course, when dinner was done with, I kindly told him that I didn't feel a great connection and didn't want to continue further in a relationship with him. He stood quietly and nodded, then walked to his car. I felt bad, but that's just how it was. I got my car and headed home. That night, I thought about Peter a few times, feeling weird now that I didn't have anyone to text, but I sat down and turned on a movie to clear my mind. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I heard soft footsteps coming up to my front door and stopping. I muted the TV and turned to face the door, still sitting on the couch. I was tired, but I knew I had heard someone. 30 seconds of anticipation went by before a few loud knocks banged on the door. It startled me, even though I was half expecting it. I got up and looked through the peephole, and to my surprise at the time, Peter was standing there. I opened the door a crack and stuck my head out. What are you doing here, Peter? Peter looked at me, then turned away for a moment, looking around. This made me feel really uneasy, and I just shut the door and locked it, hoping he'd get the hint to leave my property. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps departing towards the driveway, and a car turning on and leaving. I checked the window to make sure he was gone, then sat back on the couch. I think I was just too tired to realize in the shock of the moment, but it wasn't until I sat back down that I realized that I had never given Peter my address. A really bad feeling surged through my body, and I went to check the window again to be safe. I didn't necessarily feel in danger at this point, but just worried that Peter may have something wrong with him and had grown too attached to me. I went to bed not long after and slept well through the night. In the morning, I made coffee and breakfast, and due to the cold, snowy weather, I stayed inside most of the day. It wasn't until I was bringing the trash out to the road that I noticed a set of footprints around the side of the house. Following them, they went around both sides of the house and right up to the gate to the backyard, then off to the road. I tried to rethink what happened last night, but I was sure I heard Peter only walk up to the door and not around the house. So these footprints had to have been from the middle of the night while I was sleeping. Standing in my living room now, I was getting extremely uncomfortable and nervous. I know it sounds dumb, but my social anxiety was really trying to look for every reason not to call 911. At that time though, I'm very thankful that my panic overtook my anxiety and got me to call the police. This decision is very likely what saved my life. Holding my phone after talking to a dispatcher, I stared at the ground and took deep breaths to keep my head straight. I'd never dealt with something like this, so my mind wasn't prepared to handle the stress. But as I stood there, trying to calm my head, I heard footsteps in the snow outside the living room window. I'm not sure what else to describe how I felt, other than just completely scared. The footsteps stopped outside the window, and I began to back up slowly, trying to get to the kitchen. Then came a slight scraping sound, likely a knife being wedged between the window, trying to pry it open. It was an unfortunate reaction of mine to scream from the terror of it. Immediately, the footsteps ran around to the side of the house, followed by the forceful sound of the gate breaking open. I grabbed the first knife I saw in the kitchen and sprinted upstairs. Turning the corner though, I saw a glimpse of Peter outside the glass back door, trying to force it open. I locked myself in the bathroom, crying and clutching onto the kitchen knife as I listened to the harsh banging, scraping, and beating on the back door. It sounded like a bear trying to claw and smash its way inside. This went on for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, which felt like forever. I thought of all the horrible things he planned on doing when he made his way inside, making me even more emotional. But then, a knock at the front door overcame the sound of the banging at the back door, which immediately stopped. An officer called out, and I ran straight to the front door. While Peter had run off, they were able to find him pretty quickly, and he admitted to his crimes, though he gave little reasoning for doing them. He truly just seemed crazy and unstable. It's terrifying to think how this happened from seemingly meeting up with a normal, friendly guy. This whole thing has given me terrible trust issues, and I stopped using dating apps. One of the scariest things was that the back door was almost completely destroyed, barely hanging on by the latch. Likely, if the police had shown up just minutes later, Peter would have made it inside. And who knows what he would have done if he had gotten to me. I broke things off with my ex a few years ago. He became a reckless person, unable to hold a job or any responsibilities, so it just didn't work out. Even being the person he was though, I never thought he would do something like this. The few months after the breakup were quiet and peaceful. I was enjoying my single life, just going through the days. One night though, I was driving back home from work later than usual, and as I pulled into the driveway, I saw a man wearing all black standing outside a window on the left side of my house, as if they were trying to look inside. This was obviously really creepy, and I pulled back out of the driveway and parked further down the road, calling the police. I waited for them to show up, then once they informed me that whoever it was had left, I was able to go inside. They asked if I had any idea who it could have been, but at the time I said no. Again, I never thought of my ex as that kind of person, and there was nobody else I thought it could be. The next week went by without any problems as well, though I made sure all the windows were locked every night. One morning though, I woke up to the sound of movement outside my bedroom window. It sounded like an animal moving around in a bush, though my immediate thought was of that man I'd seen peering through the windows last week. I jumped out of bed and put some clothes on. The blinds were covering the windows, so I knew nobody could see anything, but now I felt the need to see for myself if somebody was there or not. I didn't want to call the police again just because a squirrel was hanging out in a bush. So, I pulled the blinds open. Nothing. I leaned my head closer to the window so I could see down the side of the house, and still, nobody was there. I sighed, immediately feeling safer, and continued about my morning as usual, then went off to work. Getting home rather late again, I was exhausted and cooked up a small dinner, then watched a bit of TV before deciding to go to bed early. I got up and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, but in the corner of my eye, I saw something horrifying. The window was open, just a small crack at the bottom. but I knew I'd kept it locked, so either way, someone had broken it. I walked over and looked at it from up close, then pushed it shut. The latch that was used to lock it was gone, as if it had been ripped away. I felt trapped and scared, like I wasn't even in my own home anymore. I knew I had to call the police, but I began to fear making noise as the possibility of someone being in my house became more prevalent in my mind. I was just standing there for I don't know how long, listening to the silence of the house, before the sharp, sudden sound of my phone beeping made me shiver. I pulled it out of my pocket quickly, and immediately my stomach dropped. It was a text from my ex, asking how I was doing. I stared at it, just in shock and trying to piece it together in my mind. Was this just a huge coincidence? Or was it not a coincidence at all? Was he watching me right now? Fear was taking over my body. I looked around frantically, shoving myself in a corner of the room so nobody could sneak up behind me. Then, another text came in. He said, "We need to talk." I was trying to hold in my tears as I turned my phone on silent. I started making my way slowly to the front door. As I approached, I turned the knob and tried to open it quietly, though it made a rather loud creak. Immediately, a loud thump came from behind the door to my bedroom. I threw the front door open and sprinted outside and down the road. I hid on the side of a neighbor's house and called the police. They actually made it pretty quickly, and I walked over to my driveway when they arrived. After 2 officers went in, they came out a minute later holding my ex and dragging him into their car. He was pleading, saying he just wanted to talk to me and that he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he wasn't going to do anything other than talk to me. Unsurprisingly though, he had a knife shoved in his pocket. That was hopefully the last time I'll ever see or hear from him again. Obviously, I don't believe that he just wanted to talk, but that was the story he stuck with, so I'll never know what he was actually trying to do. But him waiting in my bedroom like that with a knife, I know I was lucky to get out as safely as I did.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.